Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be stepping into a story that takes us right to Baltimore. It's a community revitalization project, and one man's experience, and it really kind of raises some questions about fairness and perception when it comes to housing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we're looking at a case file from HUD from September 2021. It's one of those situations where what the law says happened only tells you part of the story.
Yeah, and you brought some really interesting legal documents to pick apart. Joining us, as always, is our expert to help us break it all down. So let's get right into it. The case involves a complaint from Julian Smith. He's an African-American homeowner in Baltimore, and his complaint is against the developers behind something called the Station East Project. Specifically, we're talking about the historic East Baltimore Community Actions Coalition, Inc., and Eager Street Development 28, LLC.
And Station East, the project itself, was designed to revitalize a historic area of Baltimore. The goal was to rehab 40 properties. So on the surface, it seems like a really positive project, breathing new life into the community.
So that kind of makes Julian Smith's experience so interesting, right? He decided to purchase a home within this Station East project. But then he files this complaint alleging that he was treated unfairly because of his race. And this wasn't just during the purchasing process. He's saying this unfair treatment happened during the renovation stages as well.
And that gets us to the two big issues that Smith raises in his complaint. The first one has to do with a lawsuit. And it all stems from the Maryland Historic Tax Credit. We'll just call it the MHTC.
Catchy.
So the MHTC is a pretty standard tax credit. A lot of these revitalization projects use it. It's meant to encourage the restoration of historic buildings.
It's a great program. But in this case, it sounds like it created some tension.
Yeah, because even though the MHTC is common in these situations, Smith felt like he was being singled out because he was being asked to forward the tax credit proceeds to the developers. He felt like he was being treated differently from other homeowners, especially homeowners who weren't African American, like other people were getting a pass, and he was being held to a different standard.
So he was questioning if the whole MHTC process was being managed fairly.
Exactly. That's a big part of his complaint, this feeling of being unfairly targeted. The second issue he raises focuses on repairs, like home warranty repairs. He claims he had way more difficulties and delays getting things fixed in his home compared to other homeowners. And again, he felt this was because of his race.
So you have what seems like, at least on the surface, a community coming together. They're trying to do something positive, right? But then you have Mr. Smith's experience, and it just paints a totally different picture.
And that's why this case is so fascinating. It forces us to look beyond just the surface of these big projects and think about each person's experience within those projects.
Yeah. Were there problems with how things were being done? Or was everything working exactly as it should have been?
And to figure that out, we've got to look at what HUD's investigation uncovered about Smith's claims.
So what did HUD find? Were Smith's allegations true?
Well, one of the first things HUD looked at was the racial makeup of Station East homeowners. And it turned out to be a pretty diverse group. Out of 40 homes, 27 were purchased by African Americans, 15 by white homeowners, 3 by Asian homeowners, and 2 by Hispanic homeowners. There were even a few properties with multiple owners.
So it wasn't like the community was segregated or anything like that?
Right. And here's where things get even more interesting. Remember Smith's issue with the MHTC agreement? Well, HUD couldn't find any evidence that other homeowners were released from their obligation to forward those tax credit proceeds.
So that perception of being singled out, that wasn't actually true.
Right. The investigation actually found that all 43 homeowners whose properties qualified for that tax credit had signed those agreements just like Mr. Smith did. They all agreed to forward those proceeds. He signed his agreement on April 12, 2017.
It sounds like they were all playing by the same set of rules.
Exactly. But it's not quite that straightforward. So while HUD didn't find evidence of homeowners being let out of their obligations, they did find that 3 homeowners were allowed to forward a reduced amount because of tax issues.
Interesting. And were those homeowners all of a particular race?
No. One was African American, just like Mr. Smith. And to add another layer, the investigation found 8 other homeowners who just weren't forwarding their MHTC proceeds at all, and another 5 who were asking for their money back.
Okay, so maybe there's a whole other issue here about how the MHTC process was being handled in general.
It's definitely possible. Now let's talk about Smith's claims about those home warranty repairs. The investigation showed that each homeowner got a 1-year limited warranty from the general contractor for the project, Edgemont Builders.
That's pretty standard for new construction, right?
Yeah, but there's a saying, the devil is in the details. The warranty itself was very vague. It just said that Edgemont builders would promptly replace or repair any work, equipment, or materials that fail or are deficient for a period of 1 year. They didn't get very specific about what that covered.
So maybe a decent warranty at first glance,
Mm.
but the lack of clarity could definitely lead to problems later.
Definitely. And that lack of clarity might be part of what caused the issues Smith experienced, even if it wasn't intentional on their part.
It's like they were almost setting themselves up for misunderstandings. That gray area can definitely make someone feel like they're being treated unfairly, even if it wasn't on purpose.
Right. Now, what we do know is that the investigation confirmed Smith started submitting repair requests as early as November 2017, so right away.
Oh, wow. So this wasn't something he just suddenly came up with later.
Exactly, and that's important because it shows his concerns about the repairs were real. These weren't made up. It actually continued into 2020. That's when the respondents brought in a neutral third party, Freeman Consulting Group, to try to work things out between them and Mr. Smith. They even went as far as to extend his warranty beyond that 1 year mark.
So it sounds like they were making an effort to address his concerns, even if it took a while to get there.
Yeah, and as of spring 2021, when this report was filed, they were still working with him to resolve the rest of the issues.
So even though that warranty wasn't exactly clear, it sounds like in practice they were trying to make things right.
Yeah, and that's important to acknowledge.
Hmm.
But despite that, the HUD investigation couldn't find enough evidence to prove Smill's claims. Like, they couldn't prove he was treated differently regarding those warranty repairs compared to other homeowners, and they especially couldn't find that it was because of his race.
So on both counts, with the MHTC issue and the warranty, they couldn't concretely say that what Smith experienced was because of his race.
Yep, that's right. They just couldn't definitively make that link for the investigators. But, and this is important, it did show how complex these types of situations can be.
Because even if they couldn't technically call it discrimination, that doesn't erase what Mr. Smith experienced or how it made him feel.
Exactly. And that's where we have to remember the human side of all of this. Even if it doesn't perfectly fit the legal definition of discrimination, it's still really important to talk about fairness, about transparency, and about making sure everyone feels heard and respected, especially in a project that's supposed to be helping an entire community. And that's what makes cases like this so difficult. These investigations, like the one HUD did, are really important, but
They can only go so far.
exactly, they can tell you if someone broke the law, like the Fair Housing Act in this case. But
But they can't always get to the bottom of why something like this happens in the first place.
right, it's really hard to prove discrimination definitively.
Yeah, it's like, how do you prove that definitively? So what happens when someone really feels like they were discriminated against, even if it doesn't exactly fit the legal definition? How do you even begin to address that?
That's the big question. It's not a simple answer. It makes you think about things that are hard to measure, like implicit bias, microaggressions. And we have to consider the history of race and housing in America.
You start to think, what if people made assumptions about Mr. Smith without even realizing it? Or what if his concerns were dismissed because of his race?
It's definitely something to think about. And that's why this case is so important for anyone involved in community development. It shows how important self-reflection is and cultural sensitivity training. It's about making a real effort to make truly inclusive spaces.
So spaces where every resident feels like they belong and that they're respected and valued.
Yes. And that goes beyond the developers. We're talking about the contractors, the property managers, everyone. It's about going beyond just following the law. You want to build trust with the community.
It's more than just checking boxes. It's about really caring about the people these projects affect.
Exactly. And getting back to the specifics of this case, even though HUD didn't find that Smith's claims were because of discrimination, there were definitely some things that could have been done better.
What stood out to you?
That home warranty agreement, it was so vague. A 1-year warranty is standard, but they weren't clear about what it covered.
So that vagueness could cause a lot of problems.
Exactly. Being transparent is key. It helps everyone understand what to expect from the beginning. And hopefully it stops these kinds of things from happening.
And it helps homeowners understand their rights. So if something isn't right with the repairs, they have a better chance of getting it fixed.
Exactly. Everyone wins when things are clear. But this case really highlights how important it is to communicate clearly during the whole process. Keep people informed.
Don't leave people in the dark. Answer their questions. Address their concerns.
Yes. That open communication is so important. It builds trust and helps prevent these small misunderstandings from turning into huge problems.
It helps residents feel empowered to advocate for themselves. If something doesn't seem right, they're more likely to say something.
You got it. And that's crucial, especially with these large-scale projects where it's easy for people to feel overlooked.
It's about making residents feel like they're part of the process. They're not just standing by while everything happens around them.
Exactly. Now, we've talked a lot about the problems with this case, but there are definitely some positives too. Every story has two sides.
How so?
Well, the developers really tried to resolve things with Mr. Smith. They gave him that warranty extension and even brought in that third party to help. They were clearly trying to make things right.
It shows that they were at least trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, and we can't discount that. Even though we don't know exactly what their intentions were, they seemed to want to work things out fairly with Mr. Smith.
And it's good to acknowledge those efforts. It reminds us that even when things are complicated and people see things differently, there's always room for empathy and progress.
I agree. This case really shows that community development isn't just about buildings. It's about people, their lives, their experiences, and making sure everyone has a chance to succeed.
So well said.
Yeah.
As we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are your final thoughts on this case?
Well, this whole thing really makes you think about how important it is to remember the individual in all of this, you know?
What do you mean?
It's easy to focus on the big picture, like we want to revitalize a neighborhood, create new housing, all good things, but
Yeah, those are all great goals.
totally. But it's easy to forget about the people in all of that. Each person has their own story, their own experiences. And if we're not careful, those individual needs can get lost in the shuffle.
It's like, yeah, we see the forest, but what about each tree? We need to see both.
Exactly. And that's why this case is so interesting. It reminds us that there's no one right way to do community development. It takes a lot of listening and working together to make sure everyone feels heard.
So what should our listeners take away from all of this?
I think the biggest thing is remembering that race still plays a huge role in housing, even today.
Yeah, we can't just pretend that history doesn't matter.
Right. And it's not enough to just avoid doing something overtly discriminatory.
We have to actively work to make things fair for everyone, from the ground up.
Yes. And that can mean a lot of things. Investing in affordable housing, making sure lending practices are fair, maybe even looking into community land trusts.
All about giving residents more control, a real say in what happens in their communities.
Exactly. And we also have to hold everyone accountable, from the developers and contractors to the policymakers, everyone.
Right. Diversity and inclusion shouldn't just be something people say. It has to be part of everything from the very beginning.
Absolutely. Words without action don't mean much. And this isn't just on the people directly involved in these projects either. We all have a part to play.
So what can we do?
We can educate ourselves, recognize our own biases, and challenge them. And if we see something wrong, we need to say something.
Because at the end of the day, a fairer society is better for everyone.
I completely agree. This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive. It's amazing what we can learn from one case like this.
It really shows how interconnected everything is. Housing, race, community. And it reminds us that we should always be striving to do better, to learn more, to listen more.
And most importantly, to listen to and value everyone in our community.
That's a great place to end. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's always great to hear your perspective.
It was my pleasure. Talk to you soon.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll be back soon with another episode.